This is Join Us in France, episode 32. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elyse.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elyse is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a wonderful storyteller.
Oh, do I have stories?
That's good. On today's show, we'll be talking about vacation in France and what it means for travelers. Yes, there are some things you need to know about coming to France, especially if you come in August.
Especially.
It'll save you some time and some aggravation. Now, to find show notes and all the useful links we'll mention in this episode, go to joinusinfrance.com/32. And now, a little music to get us in the mood, and we'll get right into it. Hi, Elyse. It's so good to see you again.
It is good to see you again, Annie.
We haven't recorded one of these episodes in like 2 months or something.
That's right. You know why? It's because, like a good French person, you went on vacation back in the United States. And me, like a good American, I worked and then went on vacation in France.
There you go. It makes perfect sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Well, a lot has happened during the summer, mostly good things, I'm happy to report. Listenership has grown quite a lot, and we're tickled pink about that. And I want to make an announcement today. We are going to make a change on our website to respond to what our listeners want. I'll be adding a resource tab across the top at joinusinfrance.com, and that's where you'll go to find useful information that is otherwise scattered all over. You know, if I talk about, I don't know, a specific wine, it'll be in the wine episode, but then how are you going to remember to find it? Well, I'll put it in the resource tab, or if we mention a book that we like or something like that, it'll be right up there in the resource tab. And
that way you can get a hold of everything.
That's right. And we'll recommend French movies, French books. Music, cheese, I don't know. Chocolate. French things that Francophiles that you are should be interested in. And bonus, when you purchase any of these products, you'll also be supporting the show because we'll earn a very small commission. The cost will be the same to you. It doesn't cost you a penny more if we go through you or if you go directly to Amazon. But Amazon is very nice, and because we send you to them, they pay us a small percentage. This small commission will go to cover the cost for our web hosting, for our podcast hosting. We've never brought this up, but it does cost money every month for us to keep the show going. And we'd love to get to the point where, you know, the show gets some support from the listeners, especially if you're just buying stuff that you're going to buy anyway, right?
Right.
And you pay the same price anyway. So go visit joinusinfrance.com, look at the French products we love, and support the show at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie.
So, Elyse, tell us about your summer.
Well, do you want me to start? Okay, I'll start.
Sure, go.
Well, first of all, I had a very, very working summer, which is something that most people in France don't really understand.
True.
Because in France, and I don't know how many people actually know this, but the basic rule of thumb is 5 weeks of paid vacation.
Yep.
And that has been true for a very long time. Mm-hmm. There's only one other country in Europe that actually has more, and that is actually Germany. They have 6.
Wow.
They do have 6 weeks, yeah.
That's very generous.
If you're a full-time person, that is, you work somewhere and you have a full-time job, we're not talking about teachers. This is just regular old people, just regular old, you get 5 weeks of paid vacation. And this does not include, of course, the days off for Christmas, New Year's, etc. So it's a very different way of living.
Yeah. For employees, it's really nice because they get, obviously, if you're a freelancer or if you own your own business.
Right.
That's different.
Like me, exactly. Which
Yes.
is why I wound up working a good part of the summer and had a very, very short vacation.
Yeah.
But which is really why I thought it would be fun to talk about it from the point of view of someone who actually does have to deal with working while other people are on vacation, and then taking a very short amount of time for vacation myself. So how was my vacation? Well,
Yeah.
I would actually almost prefer to start off with saying, how was it to be in France, and particularly most of the time in Paris, while other people are on vacation? Because that was somehow made a bigger impression on me than my own vacation did. For people out there who do not know, most people in France, and it's changing, it is indeed changing because life is changing here as everywhere else, but there is still a majority of the people who take their vacation at the same time. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Well, that means basically they take their vacation from the middle of July till the middle of August, or at the latest to the end of the third week in August, unless it's older people whose children are out of the home already, or young people who are professionals and have very young children, and who therefore don't have to worry about getting home and getting ready for the return to school, which happens here basically exactly like in the States, the very first week of September.
Right.
But for the masses of people, they take vacation pretty much everyone at the same time. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? Well, that means that there are certain weekends from middle of July till basically the third weekend in August when if you decide you're going to drive somewhere, you're basically committing suicide. Or almost. No, that's not fair. What it is...
You're going to have to be patient.
You have to be extremely patient. They have, of course, what they call here black days, red days, orange days, and I think there's a yellow day. I don't think there's any such thing as a green day because I don't think that exists. A black day means literally, if you are coming south from the north of France, you will be stuck in traffic jams for probably 8 to 9 hours.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's awful.
Yeah, those days where everybody travels are just awful. But I suspect most of our listeners are not going to be in the car.
No,
well, some of them will.
They might be. There's just to be warned, because I know we've talked a little bit on another podcast about driving in France. There's a kind of systematic way of dealing with vacation in France, which is quite different from the way Americans think about vacation. I mean, they're much more unruly, and there's no set time. There's no set exactly. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. There are two things that I think make it very, very different in France. One is that for those people who can afford to go away, and of course there is still a percentage of the population that really cannot, and that is usually an urban population or very old people living in small villages. But pretty much for everybody else, it's either go to the sea or go to the mountains.
Yep.
And their third alternative, which is something that you know a little bit about, and I do too, because of our basically our personal life situations, is that there are a fair number of people, and this is very unusual for Americans, but there are a fair number of people, not even necessarily rich, whose families have some kind of second home, a vacation place that is either an apartment or a house, either by the sea or in the countryside or up in the mountains. And there is a real tradition in France, much, much more so, I think, than in the United States, for people to go to that family home.
Right. Or at least you send the kids.
Or to send the kids, that is, to send the kids, ship them off to grandparents or things like that. And so people go away on vacation, but it isn't the American idea of going away on vacation, spending thousands and thousands of dollars to go somewhere. They basically, for a good number of these people, and that includes people I know, they go to a family home that they share with either their relatives, or they take turns so that one family has it for 1 week, one family has it for another week.
Yeah.
And in fact,
we have that in our family.
You have that, and so I have in my in-law family. It's quite a big deal, in fact, sometimes now to work out the calendar a year ahead of time. as we get on in life and the children get to be older and they themselves have children, et cetera, it's who's going to get the house this week, who's going to get it that week, and how many people can you stand being with in the house at the same time. And then, of course, there are other people who do rent places. And that's another thing that's very common. Rather than going out of country, which people in France tend to do on shorter vacations during the year, they tend to go in the country to the sea or to the mountains. And if they don't have a family house to go to, they will rent. They will either rent a house or an apartment by the water, for instance. Yeah. And something that's very, very new and becoming extremely popular and used to be associated with people who are really people who didn't have a lot of money. But interestingly enough, now that the economic crisis is really touching a lot more people, and also because the accommodations are changing, there are lots of people who go to what in France are called campgrounds. Nothing like what a campground is in the United States.
Especially in the West.
Yeah. So,
you don't want to go to French campgrounds. I'm sorry.
Well, it depends. Okay, this is what I was going to say. There are now, just like with the hotels, there are listings where they have 1, 2, 3, or 4 stars for the campgrounds.
That's true.
Okay? And this is what we passed several of them because I was just for 1 week up in Brittany. And I just will mention a little bit where different places are. But if you go to a campground that is a 3 or 4 star campground, yes, campgrounds in France are nothing like national or state park campgrounds or national forest campgrounds in the United States. These are privately owned spaces, and everything is very, very tight. That is, you don't have lots of trees hiding you from the people next door. But this is the new thing that's been developing, and it's developed quite well, is that now people go to a campground and they rent a small bungalow.
Yeah.
Or they
they do that in America too now.
A
more
mobile home, you know.
Yeah.
And they have a huge swimming pool, and they have young adults who do activities for children. I know I have 2 friends who have teenage children and have chosen to do that for 2 weeks in the summer because the activities are taken care of for the teens or the preteens. It gives them a bit of time to breathe and not have to be with their kids all the time. Right? It's like having day camp in the middle of the campground. Yeah. And the bungalows are very nice. They're very cozy, and they're usually quite comfortable. Or even the mobile homes, which I find a little bit less so because they tend to be much more cramped and hotter inside than the bungalows. And then they have miniature golf, and then they have all kinds of, activities. It's kind of like Club Med on a much smaller level. And this has become a very popular
it's a big
thing
deal,
to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
even
more social, actually.
Yeah, even the family homes that you mentioned, I think this is important for the listeners to know about, because a lot of the properties that you're likely to find on Airbnb,
among other things,
among other kind of share economy kind of sites, will be homes that are occupied part of the year by family members, and then the rest of the year they put them up on Airbnb. Right. And so you will find, there are lots of places like that in France where, unless you want to come during school vacation, well, that's probably going to be taken. But the rest of the time, they're empty, honestly, Yeah. So it might be a good thing for listeners to know about, that where the prices are going to be more reasonable, and if you're flexible on when you come, you'll find some good stuff.
Americans, I think, have a lot more flexibility in the sense that they don't have as much vacation, but they don't necessarily all take their vacation at the same time. Right. Whereas in France, there really is this kind of coda that you take vacation from the middle of July until the end of the 3rd week in August. Yeah. And there's, in spite of a certain attempt to change that a little bit, this still is what's in rigor.
It's ingrained. It really is. And in France, really, life slows down as soon as the school is over. Right. Which is very early in July for most, students. By then it's over, and then everything shuts down. All associations, which associations are super important in France. It's like the life of the party in a village, in a small city. Everything you can want to do is going to be through an association, whether it's an instrument or theater or, I don't know, shipbuilding,
Right,
whatever.
right. It's kind of like
jogging.
clubs, right?
Yeah, it's like clubs. Yeah. And so all these associations, they just shut down. Nothing happens. For the rest of the summer. And then the first Monday of September, everything starts up again. And I know this is hard for maybe some of our listeners to imagine, but most of France is not touristy.
Right.
You know, I don't know how many villages there are in France, but it's probably just a small proportions of them that has tourists that ever go there.
Well, you know, there's tourists and tourists. I think maybe the problem is the definition of what is a tourist. If it's someone from another country, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of villages that are these very pretty, tiny little villages that are not on anybody's let's go there because you're in France list.
Right.
That have tourists in the sense that it could be family members that only go when they're on vacation.
That's true.
And that is really a different kind of tourism.
Yeah,
It's the return to great aunt's house. It's the
Correct.
great grandma who lives in this house and things like that.
But these types of villages are really going to shut down for the most part. I mean, we did a house. We live in a small village near Toulouse, and we did a house exchange with a friend, and he came to stay at our house, and we went to stay at his. It was wonderful, worked out very well for all of us. The thing is, he was very surprised when one morning in August, he goes to the bakery, which is walking distance, and it was closed. And it's, you know, the village already doesn't have a lot of businesses, but they were all closed.
Yes.
It's like the town is a ghost town.
But it's not just in the small villages. And this is why I was thinking that talking about vacation is from the point of view also of the French and of the tourists coming from another country to visit, because you have the same problem in Paris. Now, I spent the entire month of July and a good part of the month of August working, and most of that time I was in Paris, a little bit of time in and around Toulouse. The second half of August, half of the stores and half of the restaurants in Paris close.
Even in Paris.
Yeah. And of course, we're not talking about department stores, and we're not talking about huge brasserie cafes on major boulevards that are in the heart of tourist sections. But even staying in the Latin Quarter, which is where I tend to stay most of the time when I'm accompanying groups, there are the main arteries that have big cafes and brasseries that never close. They stay open all year long, of course, and they live off of a very, very strong tourism, and that's very important. But all you have to do is take a side street, and you find the little clothing shop is shut down, the little butcher shop is shut down, the little restaurant is shut down.
Yeah, they went on vacation.
They go on vacation.
Right.
And this, of course, is something that is unheard of in the United States.
Right. So our friend who did the house exchange, he also on a Sunday night he decided he wanted to go take it easy and find a restaurant, and
good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he didn't want to go into the city, and he was texting back and forth with my husband, who was giving him tips of where he could find, you know. And so my husband sent him to the suburban big mall where we go, and sometimes we eat there, and everything was closed. Now, in the year on a Sunday night, they're open. The restaurants are open. The mall's not open, but the restaurants that open to the outside are open. But in August, even the subway was closed. Can you imagine?
She's going to talk about Subway. But, you know, I mean, Sunday night restaurant, normally, even during the school year, during the year, a lot of restaurants are closed on Sunday night.
Yes.
August is just multiplying that by a factor of 4. Okay. You still have lots of things that close. There were several restaurants I wanted to take some clients to. They were not open. There's just no way of knowing.
And Americans really have a hard time even imagining. That's why we talk about it, because if you come from a North American perspective, and I assume it's the same in Australia, don't know, but I assume, and
even in England, I don't know.
Well, in England, things are open more than in France, I think.
Yes, I think they are.
But not to the same extent as in America. I mean, in America, you can decide that you want to have a meal at 2 a.m. and you will find a place that will serve you a meal.
Not in every town.
Not
though.
everywhere, but you know, you'll find something. You'll find a grocery store open at 2 a.m.
Oh, well, that's something. Yes. Well, that's
you know, but in France, no. You have to eat, you know.
Well, that you know, you're talking again about the meal times and things like that. But I think what's interesting to know is that, for instance, there's a certain inconsistency in the laws in France about where stores can stay open.
Yeah.
In heavily touristy areas along the Riviera, the Côte d'Azur, along the Mediterranean, in certain parts of Brittany, which is, of course, the northwest, which is very, very popular. It's like going to Cape Cod and the coast of Massachusetts. In the southwest along the Atlantic coast, where it's very, very important as a tourist area. There, supermarkets stay open all the time, including Sunday until 1 p.m.
Yep.
And they don't close any time during the year. And you will have food stores, and you will, of course, will have restaurants that stay open because there they close for their annual vacation in January.
Yeah.
When there are no tourists. Or the three
True.
people who are unfortunate enough to have chosen to go at that time of the year walk around the ghost town. You know,
tough out of luck.
And so what's happened is that you have, even in Paris. Okay, here's an interesting idea about what happens at summertime, vacation time. If you go to a neighborhood like the Latin Quarter, which we've talked about a lot, there are two main streets. That one of them Boulevard Saint-Michel, the other Saint-Germain. Nothing ever closes. Nothing ever closes. That is, the clothing stores, the restaurants, and everything else.
Well, they close at night.
They close at night, but I mean, they don't have a month off.
Right.
But if all you have to do is walk 3 blocks away to little side streets, and everything is shut down, and nobody cares about whether the tourists there or not because it's just out of their zone. But what's strange is that part of that is because the French regulations say. Most places are supposed to close for a while to give their workers a chance to have vacation.
Yeah.
And these places that stay open, in fact, are the exception, not the rule.
Right.
So it's very strange because they're given a special dispensation to stay open.
I think there's some sort of rule that you cannot turn down somebody who wants to go for 3 weeks in a row. You can't deny them.
As an employee?
As an employee, yeah. You have to let them go for 3 weeks in a row. You don't have to let them take 5 weeks in a row, but you have to let them take at least 3.
You know, I don't know, but it would be interesting to find out. Another thing I just wanted to mention, because of course it affects certain ideas about where people go in the summertime. Obviously, there are French people who will go to Spain, they will go to Italy, they will go to the United States.
Oh, but I was in the Western U.S. It was like I was back in France.
It was, see, they love it. They love it. That's when they go, because this is when they have vacation time, of course.
Yeah.
This is when they go to the Grand Canyon, they go to the national parks, they visit San Francisco, Los Angeles, and there are 3 or 4 other places that they go to. But in France itself, you know, there's a lot of coastline. We have lots and lots of coastline on the Atlantic coast, on the Channel. It even touches the North Sea, I think. I may be wrong. And, of course, the Mediterranean. In general, now I know this is a generalization, but in general, what you have is that along the Atlantic coast, you have more and more places that are relatively posh, where people go for their summer vacation. You have around the Bay of Arcachon, which is south of Bordeaux, and the coast of Les Landes, which is this beautiful pine forest area south of there that goes as far as the frontier with Spain, which has dunes and beautiful, beautiful beaches. Lots of campgrounds, lots of places to rent places, to little cabins and some apartments. But it happens to be, generally speaking, a population that is more or less, I would say, more comfortable financially. And as you go up to Brittany, which is a very large area, and we'll do a podcast about Brittany, but it's a huge area, in fact, in the northwestern part of France, you have even more so. It's like going to certain parts of New England or maybe certain parts of the coast of California. And if you go to the Mediterranean, which, of course, hooks around from the frontier with Spain and curves around and goes to Marseille and then all the way to Nice, which is almost at the frontier with Italy, you have a good part of the coast along the Mediterranean that is very, very, very popular in the sense that it's for people who do a lot of camping or rent little studio apartments. and it tends to be not quite as posh.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about Saint-Tropez, Cannes, Saint-Tropez, and San Rafael, and a little bit of a coastline as you get towards Nice, which is very exclusive.
Yeah, when the closer you get to Italy, the posher it gets.
The posher it gets,
Yeah.
yes. And the
But we're
harder it
talking
is
about-
to even actually get to down the roads, because they tend to be private roads, you know. But if you are on the coastline, somewhere between the
Montpellier
frontier with
and
Spain, right?
Yeah.
And you work your way up, it is just masses of people. Now, I happen to like the Mediterranean because I like swimming in it. But there is a huge difference in the climate, the atmosphere. It's fun, but you have to be aware of the fact that it's going to be packed
and loud, and lots of young kids, and more rowdy.
Lots of young families with little
Yeah.
children. It's easy because these tend to be, unlike the Atlantic coast, the beaches along the Mediterranean tend to be beaches that have lifeguard service on a lot of
Most of
part
them,
of them.
yeah.
They have vendors who walk up and down the beach selling donuts and ice cream and drinks and things like that. And
Yep.
and the beach is not that far from where you have lots of cafes and restaurants and places like that, and it's really crowded. And
Yeah. Oh, I can't knock it because I went there all through my childhood. We
Right.
would go and spend 2 months.
2 months.
Like as soon as school was out, my mother would pack us in the car and take us to the beach. And we had a little place, and we would just spend the whole summer at the beach. And then my dad would come meet us on the
Right.
weekends, and when he had his vacation.
Right.
But it was just, we went to the beach from like 10 a.m. till
But I think
8
for
p.m.
kids, it's for kids, it's great,
Yeah.
Park them on the beach,
Yeah.
see them roast a little bit. Now, of course, they all have hats on and even little suits to protect themselves from the sun.
I know,
So
it's shocking.
Really
French people are getting the message that you should protect your kids from the sun.
get them covered.
It's a new idea, because when I was a kid, I used to roast. I mean, my mother would just make us go under the big sun umbrella for a while, but we always went away,
Yeah.
and we ended up, I mean, even with, I have Mediterranean kind of skin, and even with that, I would just get
I know. You get a little bit
hammered.
of that the irritation from the sun. Right?
yeah.
But it's interesting. So it is for people who come to France and imagine going to the sea as part of their vacation in the summertime. They need to know that there are a lot of parts of the Mediterranean coastline that are just incredibly crowded. Obviously, the best months to come, if you can afford to, in terms of time and everything else, is June and September, because then you have not yet had school
Fewer
vacation,
people.
and there are fewer people. The weather is lovely. And of course, September is advertised quite literally in France as the month for vacation for those people who are retired.
Well, and I think, honestly, this year we're going to get better weather, I think, in September than we did in July.
Well, I hope so. You were gone most of July. I was not. July, I wore a jacket or a sweater until I think the last few days.
I know.
It was not too rainy, but it was definitely not warm.
Yeah, this year, and I think last year also, if my memory serves, we had a late start to the summer. And so, of course, the September and October are going to be lovely. That's what I predict. I think we're going to have fabulous weather.
Well, so far, we've since the end of August, we've had just nothing but wonderful weather. And
Yeah.
it'd be lovely if it stays that way.
Yeah, and I think for visitors, this is something you need to consider as seasons change. July is not a guarantee, or even August, that you're going to have fabulous weather in France.
No.
It's kind of moving back a little bit.
you have
later in the year.
Yes, and the other thing is, one week I was in Paris in July, and it was in the 90s every day, and so that's the other side of it, is that it's, number one, very unpredictable.
Yeah.
You can go from very hot to actually relatively cool and even rainy, but talking about that, talk about the other side of it. Aside from the weather conditions and the fact that it's obviously a little bit less crowded in terms of beaches and things like that in the late spring and in the early fall, for those people who are coming from other countries and going to Paris in the summertime, this is the warning. It's ridiculous to say it in a way, but it is absolutely important to know. You will have masses of people waiting to get into every single museum, and not one person will be French. I had the experience this summer 3 times of waiting with a group to go inside the Louvre, and finally realized that unless you do it in the evening, that is starting at 5 o'clock in the evening, and there are 2 days, in fact, when the museum is actually open till 9, so it is possible. You cannot even appreciate the things that there are to see inside it because there are so many people, and the level of noise is unbearable. And the policy of the museums is, of course, to attract more and more people. This is true at Versailles also. But what happens is that I've had people say to me, I'm not having fun. No, this is not. This is really not an enjoyable experience because you get pushed around so much. They actually had to create one-way passages in the Louvre where you went in one gallery and they had people directing people out another one because it was so crowded. And I think that unless you cannot come another time, if you are a teacher and you know you only have certain school vacations during the year, just know that there are ways to avoid this. And among the other things, as a general suggestion, is find the times of the day, and you can always find that out by either writing us and asking, or even I think there are other sites you can go on and ask. But there are times of the day,
and listen to the other podcasts where we talk about
and listen to when it is you should go, because it isn't fun anymore. Because everybody and anybody who comes from another country thinks that July or August is the best time to go and visit Paris, and it just is not.
Right. Yeah.
One last thing I just want to mention, because it has nothing to do so much with the crowds, is that most of the exhibits are not on in the summertime either. Most of the major, really interesting exhibits. There can be a little bit of something, but basically, unfortunately, most people assume that it's the best time of the year to come to Paris. Well, it is if you don't want to see Parisians, if you want to come when a lot of the things are closed, because in August a lot of the things are closed, and if you are patient enough to stand online for many of the museums, which is unfortunate.
For instance, if you want to come and see the opera, well, the opera is going to be closed.
It's closed
in the summer. Everybody, all the professionals who work at the opera, they're gone.
The dances are out.
Yeah, the ballet is the same. There are going to be some performances, but they don't put on big important performances or even shows in the middle of the summer, because they know French people are gone, and if that's the audience, the public they're going after, well, there's no point. And so I think if you want to experience Paris the way French people experience it, then you were better off coming outside of July and August.
Anytime outside of July and August, quite honestly. I was with some people. We went to visit the Opera Garnier, which is very beautiful. It's to visit as a structure, to see how beautiful the decoration is. And there was this one woman who said, are there any performances this week? I said, no, it's just like with everything else. Everything works with the school year.
Yes.
And everything, the season, theater season begins mid-September.
France is very traditional that way. We really still follow the school year for everything. Like, I think it used to be like that in America, but maybe a long time ago.
I'm not even sure.
I don't know.
It may still be. I mean, if you're coming from New York and there are plays that go on all summer long, obviously. They don't shut down in the summertime.
Yeah.
But if you have the season, the opera season, the ballet season, those begin
true.
With the school year.
Yeah, the Met does resume.
Yeah. I think that there is still that idea that you take time off.
Yeah.
There are certain theaters that stay on all year, but I think that there is this notion of seasons, tickets, the orchestra, the symphony, and things like that.
Yeah,
Everything seems to function pretty much that way.
Yeah.
But more so in France.
Oh yeah, in France it's like it's really like life stops at the end of June, beginning of July.
Really about the end of the second. But the other thing is, and that's what makes it so paradoxical, paradoxical, I think.
Yeah, that's a word, I think.
Is that it's during the summer months that you have music festivals in small villages all over France.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to avoid the masses of crowds, you avoid going to the seaside. But if you want to go to a special place that has a certain kind of festival, there are opera festivals out of doors. There are classical music concerts. There are jazz festivals.
All sorts of wonderful things.
All sorts of
We even
wonderful
have
things.
country music festivals,
Yes.
for goodness sake.
Yes. Yes, online dancing.
I have never been to the...
I did.
You did? You went to the...
Yes, I did.
What's it called?
Mirande.
Mirande, yeah.
It's no longer. It's died this year. Oh, it's closed definitively.
Oh.
They lost their financial backing. Now there's one up north near the Pas de Calais, but it's gone.
Oh, well.
No, they even had
I missed my chance.
actors from Dallas come and introduce
I know,
things.
Dallas, the show, because
Right.
French people are so behind on TV.
I know.
You
They're
know?
about 25 years behind, as a matter of fact. They still think they
yeah.
brought them back to life, actually, to have them introduce acts but we went and I didn't wear cowboy boots and a hat, but they do line dancing, and they do get up and it's kind of fun.
It's fun, yeah.
But that is the other side. That's the good side of summer vacation. Since everybody leaves the cities and everybody basically runs either to the tops of the mountains to the seashore, what you have is all of these thousands of villages. And what you were saying earlier about how many villages there are. Now, I'm going to check because the number 17,006 in my mind, but that seems like an awful lot. But I'm going to check because I want to be able to see how many
it's really
villages
rural.
there are.
You know, if you're a visitor, you probably don't know this, but France is very, very rural.
It's very
Most
rural.
of it is not that big. I mean, even the big cities. I mean, Paris is what, 11 million?
With the outlying suburban areas.
Yeah.
In Intramuros, it's only three and a half.
So it's, you know, it's not that big. You compare that to, I mean, there are cities in Africa that they're much bigger than that.
Oh yeah, no. France is a country of small and medium-sized cities.
Right, and we have a lot
of them.
Yeah, we have a lot of small cities where you know, you have the tourism. Like the French people go there on their own vacation,
Right.
but you never see like a German tourist or an American tourist, or maybe once a year or something. But it's not set up for tourism because they don't get that much. And I would guess that most places in France are like that. And so places like that, obviously, they're not going to cater to the masses of tourists, and they're not going to stay open. They're like, everybody goes on vacation, I'm going on vacation.
But the small villages have made a name for themselves as places that people go in the summertime. And those really can be quite lovely, and it doesn't matter. They're everywhere. And literally, there is not a region of France where you don't have villages that have some kind of summer festival.
Right,
and
yeah.
it can be
very nice ones.
It doesn't have to be just in the areas that people have heard of. It doesn't have to be just in Provence, or it doesn't have to be.
No, they're all over.
In Dordogne, which of course are areas that people know a lot about. Mm-hmm. It is everywhere, absolutely everywhere.
Right.
And that is the nice thing about the vacations. And French people have a tendency to do a lot of their vacation traveling within the country. Now, more and more French people will go out and take planes or trains and go to another European country, or go, for instance, to a country that's not too far away. And of course, there is a certain amount of traffic and tourism back and forth between the United States,
Canada,
and France and Canada.
Lots of French people in Canada too.
But
saw a lot of them.
But there's a lot of. I think Americans have that attitude too, and rightly so. That there's so much to see in their own country. That a lot of people think, why should I go anywhere else?
Yeah, you don't need to go every year anyway. I mean,
no,
you can.
And of course here, as you and I both know, you just go a few hours and you're in a totally different region. The architecture is different. The food can be relatively different. And if you go even a little bit more, you're in another country.
Right.
So it makes it easy.
Yeah.
But summer vacation is very special. Number one, because of this mass effect of everyone pretty much going at the same time. And for a long time, as you mentioned, not just for a week or 10 days, but 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, French people have a hard time understanding Americans who want to come and do Paris for 2 days and London for 2 days and Rome for 2 days and back home. But that is really crazy. And if you ask me, that's where I'm quite French still. I don't understand. I mean, I wouldn't want to stay somewhere more than a week probably, because I get bored after a while, unless I have business there or I have family there or friends or something. That's different. But somewhere I'm just there to visit, a week is good for me. But 2 days is way not enough. I don't know. So this summer I did a fair amount of touring in France too, because I had wonderful friends from California who came to visit, and we went to, and we'll podcast about. This is not for today. We'll do a longer show about them. But we went to Camargue, and we went to Dordogne, and we went to a whole bunch of plus beaux villages. And it was really lovely, and it was fun to see it from a tourist perspective. To
new people.
Yeah. It was just a lot of fun. We tried some things that I hadn't tried before. It was very good. And then I went over to the US and Canada, and also had a lot of fun there. But so it was a long time away from home for me this year, which is unusual. Usually we don't stay away that long, but this year, whoa.
You were just being French.
Yeah.
Just being French.
That's right. We were gone a lot. But what worked out very well for us is this home exchange, because that made it a lot cheaper and a lot more convenient. It was just very good.
Yeah, there's we should probably do a podcast about the different ways you can find places to exchange and also rent. It's become very popular to do that, as opposed to staying in a hotel. If you're staying in one place for 2 nights or 3 nights, it's usually better to just stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
But if you're going to spend at least a week somewhere, it makes it a lot easier and more economical if you have a regular apartment, so you can make some of your own food and not always eat in restaurants. And
eating in restaurants after a while gets really tiresome.
It's tiresome.
I didn't enjoy. I mean, after a while, it was like, get me home so I can eat whatever I want.
Exactly.
And not, restaurant food all the time.
Even when it's good quality restaurant food.
In America you have plenty of choices, and so do you in France. But in France, there's some places. That's another thing. There's some places that are so touristy that all you find is pizzerias and kind of all these sandwich.
Oh well, I don't find that. I don't agree. I think that I don't ever go to sandwich places, to be honest, but I think that part of it is that regional food exists, and yet if you are spending a week in the same part of the country, you will find that most of the restaurants offer the same number of dishes. Yeah. I mean, there isn't that much of a variety.
And French people are very traditional. They like to eat the traditional foods, and they're not very, like, if you have I want to eat Thai tonight. Well,
right.
Good luck finding a Thai restaurant in France.
In Paris, you can.
Yeah.
In major
and in big cities,
you can.
Cities.
But again, what I found interesting, I had several people ask me this summer, what is a traditional Parisian dish? Well, there is no such thing. What's ironic is that if you go to different regions of France, you still have regional foods that are really specialties of different areas. But what is a Parisian dish? Well, onion soup. Steak and French fries. I mean, there really is no specialty of Paris. Paris is the big, sophisticated city that pulls in people
maybe
from
we have
everywhere.
A listener who's going to know about something like that we don't know about.
Well, I asked a few people in restaurants, and I thought, what would it be? A seafood plateau and a brasserie. Good onion soup. It's a really traditional thing for the old cafe brasseries that stayed open until 3:00 in the morning. But otherwise, people kept saying to me, well, what's a Parisian dish? And I thought, well, some restaurants now specialize in Southwest food, and some specialize in fondue, which is from the Alps, and some restaurants are Provençal. And basically what you get is regional food brought to Paris, What is Parisian, I would say, is pastry. But then pastry is universal. And here I am going on a diet. I shouldn't be talking about pastry. Yeah. Okay. We have to stop talking about pastry for the moment. But we will be doing a podcast about it. I think just, one last thing about vacations is that there are also not just summer vacations, which of course basically is, as we've mentioned, from mid-July until pretty much the third week of August for most people. Mm-hmm. But you have school vacations, and there are more school vacations in France than there are in the United States.
Right.
You have 2 weeks at the end of October, beginning of November, 2 weeks at Christmas time, 2 weeks in the winter, which tends to be anywhere from mid-February till mid-March, depending on the part of the country you live in, and then 2 weeks again in the spring.
April,
March, April, sometimes as far as beginning of May, because the country is divided up into basically 4 sections in terms of vacation. And then, of course, you have a whole region of France where everyone goes on vacation. And there are lots of places in France where you can go skiing. There's the huge, of course, ski areas of the Pyrenees and then
the Alps.
And then even some skiing, mostly cross-country skiing, but there's some downhill skiing also in the Massif Central, which is the mountains in the center of the country. But if you decide to come to France to do any of those activities in the winter, you should know that if you come at a time when it is school vacation, then these places will be packed. And people do that. They go away for their vacations.
Yeah, French kids take, they have longer days because they stay in school 8 to 5 for the most part. And as they get into high school, it can even be 8 to 6. But... and they do have an hour or two at lunch, but they get more of their hours more compact, and then they take more time off. That's kind of the philosophy. Whereas in America, they end school earlier every day, but they tend to be in school more days of the year.
A little, yes, they definitely do. You know, there's a whole controversy now about whether that's a good thing here and whether.
But we worked it out when we moved here with our daughter. We worked it out to see if she would get actually more school in France or in America. And she was elementary school age at the time, and it's almost exactly the same number of hours. It's just that it's distributed differently. And the whole French kids, France is divided into 3 regions, and they don't let the kids off all at the same time.
Except for Christmas.
Everybody gets the same Christmas time. But otherwise, they stagger them by a few days to try and avoid the big rushes and black days on the roads, because literally everybody leaves. I mean, everybody leaves. And what most French people do is the children go to stay with their grandparents, because if your kids have 2 weeks off in the middle of October, well, the parents can't take 2 weeks off. Okay, so either you send your kids to one of the sets of grandparents, or you put them in a camp. You know,
I don't know if there are that many camps during the year. I know there's what they call snow camp.
And
then there's snow camp in the wintertime.
Most schools actually put on day camps for the kids, because there are some families that don't have a solution. You know, if the grandparents are not available or whatever. But that's pretty different. And
it's very different.
And that's why if you're French grandparents, you stay home during school vacation, because you're probably going to be spending time with your grandkids, and then as soon as school vacations are
you're
out,
free,
you're off, and
off.
You enjoy the cheap trips to Tunisia or to
take a cruise,
or
go to the coast when there's nobody else there.
Right. So our friends who are retired, that's exactly what happens. They stay home when they have the grandkids, but otherwise, they're out of here.
They're out of there. Well, I was just up in Brittany, in southern Brittany, and because of work, really was not able to take vacation until the very last week in August. And
you survived.
And well, barely. But yes, I did survive. But what I was going to say is that all of a sudden, and of course it's more or less my husband's problem, much more than mine, but like when we were there about 5 days, and all of a sudden he looked to the left and looked to the right, and he went, "There's nobody young here anymore." It's like, I thought, okay, what do I care? It's like they're all gone. They've all gone home. It's a kind of mass phenomenon in the country, and the whole thing about vacations during the school year is actually a bit problematic, because people who don't have parents available to take care of their children are sometimes stuck, because you cannot take off from work, and that is why they do have after-school daycare for a lot of people.
And a lot of France experiences this peak demand thing. Like everybody wants the hotel rooms from this date to this date, and then boom, empty.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's why I heard that Airbnb has like 30,000 offerings just in Paris.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, you've mentioned them a few times, but there's a whole controversy about them in France, and I don't know. I think we should really have maybe a podcast to talk about some of that without taking sides one way or the other, because there's a whole issue now in France where the government is actually getting involved in the whole thing about
because the hotels are not happy
because
about
they're not declared, and because it is
a lot of countries. I think in Barcelona, actually, they don't want any Airbnb at all in the city of Barcelona. I know outside of Barcelona, it's okay, but inside of Barcelona, the hotels feel like it's unfair advantage. But the real issue is places like that absorb a lot of the peak demand. It used to be that you couldn't find a hotel, so you would not go.
Yeah, I think that from the point of view of the government, it's more that they're not making any money off of it as tax money for declared income, because that's another issue.
I think pretty soon Airbnb is going to have to start collecting tax.
Because that's the issue. I think I don't know that the government really cares whether every small hotel stays alive or not. I think it's whether they're making any money off of this kind of tourism, which, of course, tourism is a major industry in France.
Oh, it really is.
It really is. Yeah. However, to my great astonishment, the country that is the country the most visited in the world is the United States.
Well, it's so big. How could it not be?
Well, because it's far away for a lot of people, because it's lot of...
hey, but it's
fun.
A
lot of Europeans. A lot of Europeans go. The United States is number one.
Yeah.
Spain is number two.
Yeah. A lot of Europeans go to Spain. Right. You get good weather in Spain.
Yeah. And France is only number four.
Number four. Who's three? Do you remember?
Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because they have, obviously they're beautiful countries, lots to see, and also the weather helps,
But it's strange because Paris is the most visited city in the world.
Right.
As a city.
Yes, as a city.
With over 25 million people per year coming to visit it. Mm-hmm. But the country as a total has fewer people than
the U.S.
and
Italy.
Spain and Italy, which actually did surprise me. It certainly is one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
One of, yes, of course.
One of. Come on, Annie. You are the French one.
And really, I enjoy visiting, but I have some gripes about tourism in France, which we probably don't have time to address here. But I will give you a quick one. So we go to this, and you're not going to agree with me on this one, Elyse. I know it. So we with my friends from California, they had picked a hotel in Aigues-Mortes, which is along the Camargue.
Along the Camargue.
Okay, and it was right in the center of the old walled city. You couldn't even drive your car all the way there most of the day. Well, some hours you could, but the rest of the time they closed it off. Well, okay, the bed was kind of like sleeping on a trampoline. It was very uncomfortable.
Oh, that's unusual.
Right. And so it was one of those beautiful boutique hotels. If you were in the halls, it was gorgeous. They had really old furniture. It was all beautiful, beautiful. As soon as you opened the door to the room, it was as basic and low budget as can be. And I think... unless you're willing to pay a lot of money for a boutique hotel, I think for equal money, you're better off going to a chain.
Oh, well, you and I disagree about that.
Yeah, we completely disagree about that. Because I have had such bad luck. Every time I go to a boutique hotel in the middle of the city, whatever, and I'm not paying $300 a night, I don't do that typically. For some reason, I can't sleep because those beds are it's like a trampoline. It's either a trampoline or a park bench.
I've never had that experience, but I think you're misnaming it by calling them boutique hotels, because boutique hotels are very specifically a certain category of hotel, which are very high end. And they're very, very expensive.
No, that's not what I mean.
That's not what you mean.
That's not what I mean.
What you're talking about is small private hotels.
Yes.
Okay, and there are different categories. And maybe we should really do a podcast on all of the categories of hotels. And you're right. I absolutely, totally disagree with you about that. Completely.
See, I'd rather stay at a chain hotel where I know what the basic bed is going to be like, because they're all the same all over France, and I know if I pay this, if I pay 120, I'm going to have a comfortable bed.
Right.
Whereas to all these little hotels in touristy places, so the hotel is really well situated typically, but the bed is like, oh,
I've never had
I'm
it.
just here to sleep.
No,
not
it's
here
very
to-
strange because I there are nice hotels. There are hotels that are not as nice. But I've never, and I really mean never, had the experience of having a problem with a bed ever. And I have in Italy. I have indeed in Italy several times. Never ever in France. However, I can be disappointed in the hotel because it's not as pretty as I expected, or it's some little hotels can be a little bit old-fashioned. And, so you can have a hotel where the shower stall is not that big or things like that. But I think it has a lot to do with categories of hotels, and I think we really, really need to do a whole podcast on all of
we'll
that.
do that.
Okay, but
And maybe I should follow your recommendations.
Yeah, maybe you should. Maybe you should.
But you haven't tried them all, obviously.
No, but you know what? If you pay me, I will. I have a thing. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't. I miss going home every once in a while, but not that often, I guess. Oh, well, I guess we better stop. Otherwise, I'm going to want to go traveling again somewhere.
That's great. That's great. Well, Elyse, thank you very much. That
Thank you,
has
Annie.
been very informative and entertaining as always.
As usual.
Yes, and I remind you that you will find very, very shortly now, as we're recording this podcast, it's not there yet, but by the time I release this episode, 2 days from now, oh no, actually tomorrow night, the resource tab is going to be there, and we would love it if you would visit. And
we would indeed.
And if you're going to be buying a book about France or something, buy it through us, and then we get a little cut.
That is a very good suggestion.
You know, and movies. French movies are fun.
And we'll talk. I'll mention a couple of books that might be interesting to different groups of people out there the next time.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next week.
See you all again soon. Hear you all again soon.
Yes, au revoir.
Au revoir.